I was just reading from your book. It says on February 11th, officials from ICE sent you and Jaime Zapata on an assignment to retrieve equipment from Mexico City. So, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because there's so many big issues. Sorry, but I do want to kind of get into some of the details of exactly what happened to you. You were shot. Jaime was killed. What were you guys? Where were you guys at the time, and why were you sent to Mexico City?
I was stationed in Mexico City as an accredited diplomat working for ICE as a special agent. You just take on a different role in Mexico in educating the government and doing a lot of training. And in Mexico, it was hand in hand actually with all of criminal investigations of all sorts that we talked about. But that particular day, we were returning from closer to the Monterrey region, picking up equipment from our ICE counterparts from that office, returning back to Mexico City. It was kind of a botched assignment. I challenged it. We weren't supposed to be on that road. There was an alert issued by the ambassador prohibiting anyone from driving on Highway 57.
So tell me about, so you were going to drive from Mexico City to Monterrey?
Correct.
How far is that?
It's about an 11-hour drive.
Okay. Along a highway called Highway 57. Most people haven't heard that name. I haven't either.
Highway 57, which is, think of it as it's an interstate, but it just has the name highway, but it's an interstate. It's the toll road. It's the quote unquote safe road.
And there was an alert. And we're talking about, this is like in California, the 5 freeway, it sounds.
Correct.
Like.
Correct.
So there's an alert not to drive on Highway 57?
Correct. A few weeks before, the ambassador issued an alert to all U.S. personnel prohibiting them from driving for personal or business reasons, because we knew the intel. I knew the intel. We all knew the intel that the Zetas cartel controlled most of those corridors that we drove. We drove. That's the main artery between Mexico City and Texas through Monterrey up to Texas. And we knew that the Zetas cartel had a huge presence in certain parts of this highway. And my supervisors ignored that and ignored that intelligence and send us on that highway anyway, without any backup, without the customary standard operating procedure that we would do in Mexico because of the security issues.
So it was just the two of you driving what kind of vehicle?
It's an 2009 armored suburban vehicle.
Okay. And when you say armored, does it also have the where it's all bulletproof protected or whatever?
It's a bulletproof car. All of it is armored. It's a lot of people think it's kind of like I compare it to a shoe that's waterproof. It's water resistant. It might still get wet. And so these are armored vehicles. And yes, they stop. The reason why I'm still alive is because that windshield of one of that vehicle stopped the rounds that were trying to get to me. But a lot of rounds did come into the Suburban. But yes, it was armored, and there's a lot of issues that happened during the ambush, because that's what it was on the way back. We got ambushed by 2 SUVs.
What exactly if you can tell, were you guys going to pick up?
It was electronic equipment, more like tracking devices that was going to be used for a money laundering case that we were working on in Mexico. And there was a sense of urgency from my supervisors to have that back in Mexico City. I had challenged it. Let's bring it by air. Let's bring it by other means. But they denied all that and said, you got to go get it.
When you got the assignment, you considered this to be a dangerous assignment.
Absolutely. Especially because I hadn't been previewed to any of the information. In the law enforcement world, you got to be briefed. And I hadn't been briefed. All of a sudden, I got the assignment thrown on me. I had just gotten back into the country from another assignment the day before. And then I got the assignment. And I don't know what's going on. And I'm trying to catch up. And they had already made these arrangements 2 months before and had been working on this. And I was never privy to it. I get brought in the day of the assignment and I'm questioning all these issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you guys were, by the way, when you see the vehicle, is there any way someone would know that it was U.S. agents inside this vehicle? Does it have any markings in that regard?
Yeah, it has diplomatic plates on it for sure. These plates look different. They're besides during the ambush, I yelled at them and at the shooters and identified ourselves as Americans, as U.S. Embassy employees, as diplomats, that this was a diplomatic vehicle. And in fact, they did testify in 2017 at the court hearing that in fact they did hear me. They knew we were Americans.
So tell us what happened as far as the ambush.
So on the way back, after picking up the equipment, I had been driving most of the way. Jaime Zapata takes the wheel right after lunch, and within 50 minutes, we're ambushed basically by two SUVs full of armed gunmen, Zeta cartel members that we didn't know at that time. Obviously, were Zeta cartel members. They forced us off the side of the road, and amongst a lot of confusion and some shots that were fired, they were trying to open the doors. And while we were locking the doors, my window, my armored window came down 2 inches on my side. We didn't know that because the lock buttons and the window buttons were next to each other on this Suburban. And so during the commotion, 2 of the shooters introduced an AK-47 and a handgun by my head on my side. And I raised the window and caught the barrels of both guns, trying to avoid them. And without warning, they opened fire into the cabin of the Suburban, striking Agent Zapata multiple times, striking me 3 times, once in my chest and twice in my left leg. And so eventually they pulled the guns out. I raised the window. They shot at us over 100 rounds and tried to get out of there, crashed the vehicle. Agent Zapata became unresponsive. We ended up in the median, and one of the SUVs still, one left, the other one came back. 2 shooters came back and stood in front of me, and with 2 AK-47s just were trying to penetrate and shooting through the front windshield to get to me. And then they left thinking that it had gone through. And so they left us for dead. I called the U.S. Embassy, asked for help, called the federal police, the only person that I trusted at that time from the federal government. And we were there for 40 minutes, which is a very long time, in the middle of that highway until help arrived.
Wow. So they never were able to enter the vehicle?
No.
Why do you think they did what they did?
I think they knew that we were Americans, and I think they wanted a hit on Americans. You'll hear the rhetoric on the defense that they wanted to carjack us, or they wanted that Suburban, and that's absolutely not true. They destroyed that Suburban. They knew that we were Americans. They testified that we were Americans. It had happened many times in Mexico with other U.S. agents are held at gunpoint, and they identify themselves as DEA, FBI, and they kind of throw their hands up and say, okay, and the cartel leaves them alone. There was this always unwritten rule that you just don't mess with U.S. law enforcement in Mexico ever since the killing of DEA agent Enrique Camarena in 1985. But that all changed on February 15th of 2011.
And why do you think it changed? Why would the cartels, or that particular cartel, suddenly want to mess with the U.S.?
That's a great question, and not one that I get a lot. And it's a great question because that's where you start seeing the shift of the cartels, how aggressive and abrasive they become, and no longer fear U.S. law enforcement. And that's what we're seeing at the border when we get talking about that. They no longer fear that, and they no longer feel the repercussions, and they basically don't care. And they have taken over territories, if not all of Mexico. And they're not going to let the U.S. law enforcement or anyone get in their way of what they want to do.
Yeah, it was always been my impression that they don't want to wake the sleeping giant. We'll call that the U.S. That they're getting away with murder down there, literally and figuratively, and the Mexican government is inept in controlling them. And then you've got the 10,000-pound gorilla right across the border, which theoretically we could do something about them. It would take a big commitment to do something about them and cooperation with Mexico and so on. But I always felt that the cartel's attitude was, hey, let's not mess with the U.S. Let's not wake them up. Let's not kill U.S. tourists, for instance. If U.S. tourists started dying, that's going to wake us up. So it's always been my impression that they don't want to do things to wake up the U.S. But you're actually saying that, yes, that was the case, but you think that's changing.
It's changed, and yes, U.S. tourists are being killed. Just last month, 2 tourists in Tulum, next to Cancun, were killed by gunfire. One from the U.S. and one from Germany. And so it happens all the time where people are caught in these gunfires at
But
at
when we say
high-end
caught,
resorts.
is it kind of caught in crossfire gunfire?
Yes, most of the time it is. But you know, they're there. They're at the cartels are everywhere, especially in the resort areas, at the high-end resort areas. They killed 2 cartel members on the beach. They came in via the water and executed 2 of them. Just we're talking about 2 weeks ago in Cancun, and there's video of it as well. And I've seen that video, and it's they're brazen. They don't care, and you're there, you're vacationing, and the bullets fly, and that's where they might not necessarily target. And you're right that the cartels don't want to target the tourists because they want the tourism to come in because they sell a lot of drugs and a lot of illegal activity with the tourists that come into Mexico. But they don't care when they're going to execute their business and kill people. They don't care who else they take along the way.